We'll do a review, the Likutei Sichas, volume 19, Chelek Yutes, the second sicha for the parshas of Eikev. The sicha is starts off with a Rashi sicha and ends up with a whole discussion about one who begins a mitzvah, that they should finish the mitzvah. What about the one who started it? And a lot of beautiful details the Rebbe explains in the sicha, but it starts off basically with the parsha. This is in Rishon. The pasuk says in the beginning of Perek Ches in Rishon of Parshas Eikev, the pasuk says over there that Kol HaMitzvah Asher Anoich Mitzavcha Hayoim, all the mitzvah that I instruct you today. So the language of Kol HaMitzvah, it would seem grammatically problematic. It should say Kol HaMitzvos, all the mitzvahs. If it means all the mitzvahs, what does it say Kol HaMitzvah? Then if it means Kol Mitzvah, every mitzvah that I tell you, so then it should not say HaMitzvah. And then the pasuk says, so it's a little bit difficult. Kol HaMitzvah, say all the mitzvahs. And then the pasuk continues to say, Asher Anoich Mitzavecha Hayoim, which I command you today. So basically the mitzvahs that Moshe Rabbeinu was commanding them at that time. So if you keep these mitzvahs, Tishmerun Lasis, so that Leman Tichyun Urevisen Uvosem, so you will live, you will increase, and you will come and you will inherit the land. Asher Nishba Hashem Laveseichem, that Hashem will swear to your father. And the Rebbe, main point that the Rebbe will make in the sicha, that the pasuk hinges the Mantichin Revisim Mubosim Virishim Oretz to Kol HaMitzvah Asher Anoich Mitzav Chayim, that the reason they will be married to come to the land is called of the mitzvah. Which mitzvahs are we talking about? As we'll see at length in the Rebbe's sicha. But first, the Rebbe is going to explain and bring down the Rashi over here. Kol HaMitzvah, it says Kipshutei, that it means literally, which would mean all the mitzvahs. That means even though it's a shtickle doichik of Kol HaMitzvah, then Rashi brings down a Medrash Agoda, that which would translate the word Kol HaMitzvah, do the entire mitzvah. As the Rebbe will always explain later on in the sicha, how is that connected to coming and inheriting the land? We're saying that if you do the entire mitzvah, so that will bring you about to inherit the land for doing the entire mitzvah. As the Rebbe will explain that they also had the part of the mitzvahs that were done before them. So because they are the ones, the Medrash Agoda brings down, they are completed. If you start a mitzvah, finish it. So it's called on the ones that completed. So those who are going in Eretz Yisrael, their mitzvahs are the ones that are counted as the ones that bring them to Eretz Yisrael. And the Rashi brings down Shenemar, there it says that the bones of Yosef, the Bnei Yisrael brought from Egypt. That's in the pasuk in Yeshua. Seems like who is the one that brought up the bones of Yosef? It says Bnei Yisrael. And it covered B'Shechem. But that's not the case. The case as we know that they were leaving Mitzrayim. Moshe himself occupied himself to bring up. They were buried. They were under in the Nile River, and he brought them up. So why do we say that the Bnei Yisrael brought them up? But since Moshe did not have a chance to conclude and bring him into Eretz Yisrael, because he didn't go into Eretz Yisrael, but Gomrua Yisrael, Mikras al Shemam is called on their name. And the Rebbe will bring out that likewise is that the Yidden that went into Eretz Yisrael, so even those Yidden that lived in the desert, with no fault of their own, they didn't make it, still it's all called the Kol HaMitzvah. As the Rebbe will explain by Riches, just give out a few points that the Rebbe will touch in the sicha, so that as we learn it, we'll see the specifics. So let's go inside. Ois Aleph. So in Posuk, in the verse, Kol HaMitzvah Asher Anochi Mitzavcha Hayoim. Ois Aleph. In Posuk, Kol HaMitzvah Asher Anochi Mitzavcha Hayoim Tishmerun Lasis V'Gomer. All the mitzvah that I instruct you today, you shall keep to do. Rashi, the Verter, so Rashi places himself on the words Kol HaMitzvah, says all the mitzvah. When is Mefarish, and Rashi explains Kipshuta. What does it mean, Kol HaMitzvah? It means all the mitzvahs, literally. See, the Rebbe will teach you out what Rashi means. Then there's an Agoda interpretation. Kol HaMitzvah means the whole mitzvah. Mean taka one mitzvah. Any mitzvah, do the whole mitzvah. If you start the mitzvah completed, it will come on Siv Beis, as the Rebbe will bring down the rest of the Rashi in Siv Beis. First, the Rebbe wants to address what's the problem over here in Rashi. What is the difficulty? We say another pshat, that means that something is difficult in the first one. In the Kipshuta, Pshuta means literally, if that's okay, why do we need to bring in another pshat? Because of the difficulty, Rashi needs to bring a second interpretation. So what is the difficulty? Not only does Rashi have to bring a second interpretation, it's not a pshat interpretation. Rashi starts, it says, Rashi says that this is an agodic drasha, this is an expounding of the agoda. That means it's not the literal. So it must be that there's something problem with the first shot. So the Mefarshim explain. As in Posik, Yishver the Loshen Kol HaMitzvah, that in this verse, there is difficulty with the language, all the mitzvah. But mitzvah is a Loshen Yochid. That's a singular language. Mitzvah seems like one mitzvah. Ein mitzvah, one mitzvah. The mashmos from kol, and the meaning from kol means alle mitzvahs, is alle mitzvahs. Therefore, we need to say, as the taich in kol mitzvah do is not alle mitzvahs nor yede mitzvah. We have to say each mitzvah, not all mitzvahs, plural, but each mitzvah. As bleibt aber nicht verstandig, if you say so, if the meaning is kol mitzvah, each mitzvah, if you say darf stehen kol mitzvah on a hey, you shouldn't say kol ha mitzvah. Say kol mitzvah, nicht kol ha mitzvah. If it means each mitzvah, kol ha mitzvah would mean all the mitzvahs. The difference of Rashi kipshutei umedrash agoda v'chud, which means so Rashi says nicht gucken dich auf die Schwierigkeit in ersten Pirush kipshutei, notwithstanding the difficulty in the first interpretation, which is the literal, is doch does der Pirush Rishon v'ikri pshut mikra. This still is the first and main interpretation in the literal learning of the verse. Aber kidei zu verantworten the shaila hanal. But in order to answer, why does it say kol mitzvah, not kol mitzvah, but it says kol ha mitzvah? Bringt Rashi a zweiten Pirush. So Rashi brings a second interpretation from Medrash Agoda, and therefore, according to that interpretation, everything is answered. If you started a mitzvah, concluded, was like them Pirush, according to this interpretation, that taka der posik, the posik is speaking wegen ein mitzvah. It talks about one mitzvah. Und der Loshen kol ha-mitzvah means not all the mitzvah. All the mitzvah means the whole of this one mitzvah. Meint as man darf ton the ganze mitzvah. It means that you need to do the entire, all of the mitzvah. Und nicht a mitzvah von a mitzvah. So kol ha-mitzvah, do the entire mitzvah. So basically we're saying that Rashi has trouble explaining the word kol ha-mitzvah, the grammar over here, Either it should say kol mitzvah, each mitzvah, or kol ha-mitzvah is all of the mitzvahs, not kol ha-mitzvah in Lashon Yochid. And therefore Rashi is struggling with this. But the Rebbe points out this language of kol ha-mitzvahs have already been used before, and Rashi hasn't commented on it. It means that Rashi assumes that even though it says mitzvah, mitzvah could mean the name of mitzvah, which means all the mitzvahs included. The Rebbe brings from the Mefarshim say so, and that's not really his problem. There's something else that's going on over here. Kadaikis over. When you are going to really look into it, however, kemen nitzogen as Rashi, we cannot say that Rashi is oisun tzibavor and odikasha is coming here to forewarn and caution us and give us a problem with this problem of the loshon of kol ha-mitzvah. Well, there's zelber loshon because the exact language of kol ha-mitzvah states in Freir and Chumash. This is already written, stated earlier in the Chumash. Or Rashi stellt sich dort nicht up, and Rashi doesn't stop over there if then. Musman zogun, so we need to say this is by Rashi kinkashin. That's not the problem to Rashi. Well, oich kol ha-mitzvah, even it says a singular loshon mitzvah, can like Rashi mean in all mitzvahs. This could mean all mitzvahs. All mitzvah. So in that case, the question comes back to its place. What kind of a difficulty is there in kol ha-mitzvah versteht in unser parsha? Specifically in our parsha, it seems like Rashi has a difficulty with the kol ha-mitzvah over here. Was Avkedosh told Rashi of them. Specifically here, Rashi places himself of this. Und sagt kipshutei, and he says it means literally. Und bringt noch euch hapirush from Medrash HaGodah. And then he brings on top of that, he's struggling. He says, well, it means literally. And he brings a commentary of Medrash HaGodah. There's something more that is problematic to Rashi. That Rashi has a problem with the kol ha-mitzvahs. The Rebbe will explain that there wasn't so many mitzvahs that should give them the zechus to go into Eretz Yisrael, and that was basically the issue that Rashi was having over here as it fits into the pasuk. In Ois Beis, the Rebbe is going to further explore the second lengthy Rashi in the Medrash HaGodah that the Rebbe brings down, that when you start a mitzvah, you should finish it. Base. In the Pirush von Medrash HaGodah, was Rashi brings to Barichus, in the commentary of the Agodic interpretation that Rashi brings at length, if you started a mitzvah completed, Rashi basically wants to just say to us, Kol ha-mitzvah, do all the mitzvah. But Rashi brings down this whole piece. It says, She'ein ha-mitzvah, she'ein nikras ha-mitzvah, al shem ha-goimra. The mitzvah is only called upon the one who finishes it. Again, the Rebbe is going to ask on all these details over here, why is that important to explain kol ha-mitzvah, that you have to do all the mitzvah, and then everything else that Rashi adds, as the Rebbe will ask now. As the Rebbe is important to show from this that this is actually part that answers the whole placement of this pasuk within the context of coming into Yarshin Eretz Yisrael. So Rashi says the mitzvah is not called only on the name who concludes it. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, that the bones of Yosef, that they, who is they? The Bnei Yisrael, the pasuk says, brought from Mitzrayim. They buried in Shechem, but we know that the reality is, but did not just Moshe himself, Moshe himself occupied to bring up the bones of Yosef, which were buried underneath in the Nile River. He brought them up. So why are we saying that the Bnei Yisrael brought up the bones? Because Moshe had not had the opportunity to conclude it, the Gomruho Yisrael, and it was concluded by the Yisrael, Nikras al Shemom, that's why it gets the name as the Yisrael are the one that brought up the bones, even though it was Moshe. because they conclude. So darf man verstehen, kama the yukim and loshen Rashi. So we need to understand several points in Rashi over here. Umehem, and some of them the Rebbe is going to enumerate. Aleph, number one, we don't need to go further than Rashi just to say that when you start a mitzvah, finish it. That explains the meaning of the word kol mitzvah. This whole thing with the mitzvah is called and one finish doesn't seem to be applicable. Aleph, the chayre is the haschola from Pirush. It would seem that the beginning of the interpretation, im hischalta b'mitzvah gemoide. So if you start the mitzvah concluded, it's maspik to masbir zayin dem loshen kol mitzvah. That seems to be sufficient to explain the language of all the mitzvah. Vos is don negeya der hemshech. What is it here? Connect. How do we? Why is it important over here? The following statements of the Rashi, the She'en Nikras Mitzvah El Hashem Gremro. Who is the one that gets the benefit? Who is the one that say that finished that who did the mitzvah? We say the Gremro. Why is that important? Befrat base, especially noch the Raya the Roi for Moshe. Then instead of just saying it, Rashi brings evidence. He said there's a proof for Moshe, and then goes into the whole evidence. Why is that important? And Gimel, if Rashi will bring in a raya, Rashi wants to bring evidence, just as unterstreich that emphasized the Mechomer from the Gomer Zayin mitzvah, the seriousness of not concluding a mitzvah. Well, doch mer masim given to bring in the raya, then it would seemingly be more fitting to bring the evidence from welchen Chazal and Gemara Medrash, from which our sages of blessed memory, both in the Gemara and the Medrash, learning up, from which they learn as a maschil b'mitzvah ve'ena goimra. They learn it out from not from the story with Moshe Rabbeinu with Yisrael, but they bring it up that one who starts a mitzvah should finish it, and there's some very serious repercussions if you don't finish the mitzvah. First of all, they bring down Meridin Oisei Migdulosei. So they bring down from Yehuda. Yehuda started saving Yosef by telling his brother Mabetza, and they took him out of the pit. And then what follows? But he didn't follow through with the saving of Yosef. He allowed him to be sold to Mitzrayim. So therefore, what does it say following that story? Vayeredu Echav Migdulosei, Vayered Yehuda. And Rashi and the Gemara explains that that means that they had put him down from his status of being the leader. So you see that for starting a mitzvah, not finishing, he loses status. Not only that, the Gemara says even more serious. Nochmer koiver chulu, he buries his sons and his wife. You see the story of the all of his children, the two of his children died, and then Thomas Bas Shua, his wife died from Yehuda. So that's very serious of not completing a mitzvah. So Rashi wants to say that in a mitzvah nikra Hashem Goimra, why does he bring the proof from the bones of Yosef that Moshe, it's not called Moshe, but on the Bnei Israel? And like I said, mentioned earlier, the Rebbe will very explain this so beautifully later on that this actually, we're trying not to just tell you something about concluding the mitzvah, that but we're trying to say specifically that even when you don't have a choice, like in the case of Moshe, he couldn't bring up, and yet he couldn't bring the ball. They didn't let him into Eretz Yisrael, and yet the people that finishes is called their name on it. So the Yidden who are going is the Mantichim, Revisim, Rosh Hashanah, that it's still called on their name, all the mitzvahs that the Yidden did before him, as we'll see later on. Dalet. What is the Loshen? What is the language that Rashi uses? Elo Lefi Shlehispik Legoimra. He didn't have a chance, Moshe, to finish it. Why do we care You want to say how important it is to finish a mitzvah. Why are you trying to find the reason? Rashi will doch be Ikira is bringing. Rashi is mainly trying to bring out the point as Nikra Shem Goimro, that the one who finishes the mitzvah, that's the name it's called on, is Meinaf Kamine Favos Moisha the mitzvah mit Goimer Gewen. So what difference does it make why he couldn't complete it? The Rashi says he didn't have a chance to finish it. Moshe Rabbeinu. So therefore, since Rashi does add these words that he didn't get a chance, is mashma. So then from this it appears we can understand Adoy's negeya the Reifun was the midgoimer is given. That over here to us, it's important to know that the way that it wasn't concluded was because he didn't have a chance to conclude it. That it was be'oinus, it was against his will or history. Says nid given tolu in him. It wasn't something hinges on him. In other words, he didn't make the choice not to finish it. Rashi wants to specifically say that even when the choice has not hinged on them, and yet we say the mitzvah is the kras Hashem. So now the Rebbe says the Chlal, other Meforshim learn that the Kol HaMitzvah comes behemshech to the Avodah Zorah that we learned before, that when the Yidden will go into Eretz Yisrael. So over there, talking about Avodah Zorah, we know already Avodah Zorah is called a special mitzvah that it's equal. Rashi says it's equal to all the mitzvahs. It's also called the mitzvah because it is a serious and it's idol worship. The pasuk before has said that when they come to the land of Eretz Yisrael is Kol HaMitzvah. So we can say that all the mitzvah that were said before. So it's one mitzvah, it's considered like all the mitzvahs. So the language of Kol HaMitzvah, which means all of the mitzvah, which is the one mitzvah, which is like all the mitzvahs. So Rashi doesn't learn like that. The Rebbe explains because that is talking about after the Yidden come to Eretz Yisrael. So the pasuk says that the Avodah Zorah that they have when they chase out the people, inhabitants of Eretz Yisrael, they should make sure not to worship the Avodah Zorah. But here, Moshe was telling them in the Zchus what they're doing now. So Rashi can't learn that they call HaMitzvah. So this is the point the Rebbe is going to give the key of the answer that we're talking about over here. That's what Rashi doesn't learn like them, because in this pasuk, it's talking about the mitzvahs of which they will merit to go into Eretz Yisrael. The mantichyun uvosem v'yirishtem ha'aretz. This is the mitzvahs. So over here, we're going to start with the issue. So what is this kol ha-mitzvah? Which are all these mitzvahs? Let's look inside. Gimel. The biur bozeh, to explain this, the explanation in this, that werden verstandig behegdem hashayla, we will understand it by first introducing the question. Pavos lernt nit Rashi dem kol ha-mitzvah. Why Rashi does not learn the meaning, interpretation of kol ha-mitzvah, the andere Meforshim learn as it is learned by other commentators. And those batzitzich zu dem was says retzich in the psukim erst farden, that this relates to that which has just been spoken of in the verses that precede the pasuk of Kol HaMitzvah. Over there it says, Psilei Elokehem Tiserfun Ba'esh. These pestles, sculptures of their gods, you shall burn in fire. Lo Yisachmit, don't lust the kesef v'zoyvalem v'leisovi ta'evel b'secha gomer. Don't bring the abomination that Avodah Zorah to your home. Gomer. That's the psukim that precede Kol HaMitzvah, which is basically the isur from Avodah Zorah, the prohibition from Avodah Zorah. Under far. And therefore, the Meforshim explain, because we're talking about one mitzvah, which is the mitzvah of Avodah Zorah, Zok Torah. That's what the Torah says, a mitzvah, Loshen Yochid. That's what it says in a singular. But on the other hand, if them gesagt kol, it's a kol, and as wird euch angerufen mitzvah stam, We don't specify which mitzvah. We just call it mitzvah. We also say it all. As Rashi has already explained, interpreted in his commentary earlier, Rashi has already commented that shkula avodas alilim keneged kol mitzvahs kulo, that the idol worship is equal to all mitzvahs, all of the mitzvahs, and vanizar bo kishemer es kulo. And one who is careful is as if he would be guarding all of the mitzvahs. According to this, is oich glatik der loshen, and in addition to kol, and the mitzvah is also ha mitzvah, with a known hey that is known as hadam mitzvah, the mitzvah, that we just spoke. So why does Rashi not explain like that? Is the hasbara b'zeh. So the explanation of this. In Frier the Psukim, sagt Moshe on the Eden in the previous verses, Moshe is instructing, telling the Eden, as Eretz Yisrael, that they will conquer Israel. And he will give their kings of Canaan in the hands of the Yidden. And that is massive, and he's warning them. The statue, the sculpture of the God you should burn. Don't bring this abomination to haste. That means that you need to be careful. No, them Eretz Yisrael, that after you will go in and conquer Eretz Yisrael, the melee is dit mistaber, so therefore it does not really sit well. It does not logical as kol ha-mitzvah, that all of the mitzvah made them free to conceive, that this means the previous instruction from Sila came Tisra from Gomer, and not to bring the abomination. Why? But in them pasuk, in our pasuk, this is the Rebbe's key to the explanation for this question, as well as what we've asked in the whole beginning of the sicha. But in the pasuk kol ha-mitzvah v'gomer is a mamshir, because in this verse of kol ha-mitzvah he continues lema'an tichyun v'gomer u'vosser v'rishta masoret, so that you will live, etc., and you will come and you will inherit the land. So you're not there yet. We're talking about how you merit so that you will live and you will come. But this is adur tishmer u'masis, that through you will keep to do kol ha-mitzvah, that when you're going to do all the mitzvah, you will going to merit to live to shpeter onkumen, so that later on you will come on Yashin and Eretz Yisrael, inherit the land of Israel. Be'ez, so that's what the pasuk says here. But Be'ez as the Friedik et Sevuyim, the previous commands, but seeing sich zum Zaman, they refer to the time as kumen nochun. They come after Basar v'Yirish to Masaret, after you come and you inherit the land. Doesn't sit well that this should mean. The Rebbe says, the parenthesis, you can say that Choch as B'deiche Kamen Zogen, if you want to squeeze, you can say, as the mit werd gemeint der Isur von Avodah Zorah Bechlal, that here we mean the man general Avodah Zorah. We're not talking about specifically exactly what the pasuk talked about, but there the pasuk talked about what's going to happen when you come. But here we're talking about generally Avodah Zorah, but it still follows the Avodah Zorah concern that the pasuk had when you come later on. Lav Dav Kishpet doesn't mean that later on, but yet that doesn't sit in the simple way. To Rashi wants to learn something which is smoother, that we're talking about, not those mitzvahs from before. So based on this, the Rebbe is going to explain now in Eis Daled that we have to understand that these are the mitzvahs that Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them that they will do that will merit to bring him to Eretz Yisrael. So what is the Kol HaMitzvah? Well, what kind of a mitzvah is he telling them today? So everyone's going to figure out and going to show there's not that many mitzvahs that Moshe Rabbeinu was instructing them. So how is all these mitzvahs that he's telling them today, you're going to bring them to Eretz Yisrael? So based on this, we'll understand that the key is that these mitzvahs are a lead to get into Eretz Yisrael, to merit to go into Eretz Yisrael. So we'll understand why Rashi places himself on the verse. What's bothering him? And he says, well, this is literally. Moshe Rabbeinu hat angeheben Zogun Mishnah Torah ba'ashte osor chodesh be'echad lachodesh. He started to say Mishnah Torah, as the pasuk says, on the 11th month, which is the month of Shvat, and he started it on the first day of the month, Aleph Shvat. The entire Mishnah Torah was from Aleph Shvat till Zayin Oder. So in those days, Moshe Rabbeinu gave over the Torah. Now we're up to right now the Parshas Eikev. Eikev is a few weeks, so we're not sure exactly when he said it. Rosh Chodesh Shvat. So that is on Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Azoi, as Parshas Eikev is durch him gezog geworden, so the portion of Eikev was said noch, either after or the Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Maybe he said it on that same day, included. Okay, but at least we know it wasn't earlier. So now we have to say that bald as Moshe Rabbeinu zogt kol ha-mitzvah asher anochi mitzavucha yom tishmor lasis, that all those mitzvahs I tell you today you should keep and do them leman tichyon, so that you will live urivisem and you will multiply bosem virishtem es haaretz and you will come and inherit the land. As zu libun kiyum fun kol ha-mitzvahs, because of fulfilling all the mitzvahs that mezeicha zayin to einem and Eretz Yisrael, they will merit to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Isn't it? Move on is not understood. Was the pasuk zog kol ha-mitzvah? What is the pasuk telling us? All the mitzvahs. As durch dem kiyum von alle. Kol ha-mitzvah before means all the mitzvahs, but the mitzvahs of alle taryag mitzvahs of all the mitzvahs that meshpeter. So later on, you will merit zayin leman tichur v'sim v'osum v'yirishtem, so that you will live and multiply and come and inherit. From the time of Rosh Chodesh Shvat till the end of Eretz Yisrael, gekent mekayim zayin lois akhlgor claim itself of the Taryag mitzvahs. They were only able to observe a very small number of the 630 mitzvahs. As for example, klal need the mitzvah lois baretz at all. Of the 630 mitzvahs, those mitzvahs that hinge on, you have to be in the land of Eretz Yisrael. Und euch nicht kamo v'kamo mitzvahs an noyeg b'chutz loretz. Also, many mitzvahs that apply in chutz loretz, such as Yom Tov, they were in Shvat, and they're going to go into Eretz Yisrael, and there's going to be no Yom Tov between the time that he's commanding them. So which of the 630 mitzvahs would they be able to do? Not Eretz Yisrael mitzvahs, not Yom Tov mitzvahs. The Rebbe says in the brackets, well, maybe in this case it wouldn't mean all the mitzvahs, the 630 mitzvahs, maybe it means all of the mitzvahs that he tells them today. So it's not referring to all 630 mitzvahs. So the Rebbe says, the Rebbe gives reasonings. This is a great difficulty to say. As mitkol mitzvah meinternit alle mitzvahs. That it doesn't mean all mitzvahs. Nor blows the mitzvahs only the mitzvahs that I tell them today. All the mitzvahs that them talk. That's not logical. Vorum, number one, Aleph. Why should we actually say that they're going to come and inherit the land? Specifically in the merit the observance of the mitzvahs, which he told them on that day, that's what they're going in. That's difficult. Based the Pirush HaPoshur from the Tzavcha HaYoim, and literally when we say, I told you today, isn't it that Ein or Ein Tzketom? We're not talking about this one singular day. No, he's talking about that time. It means, when I instruct you today, it means all the mitzvahs that are Mishnah Torah. As the Pasuk says in the end of Eschanan, you will guard the mitzvah, the chukim, the statutes, and the mishpat that I tell you today to do them. Because main kipshut ala mitzvah means all mitzvahs. So, and number 3, main dafke dem tog. Specifically, means that day where the shaila. So the question is, we don't know which of the mitzvahs. So he's telling them, listen to all the mitzvahs I'm telling you today, and we don't know which are those mitzvahs. And we know that we're trying to make it clear. The pasuk doesn't come to make it obscure, but rather clarify. We don't even know exactly what day. We know maybe Rosh Chodesh, maybe later. Has to be clearly. So, Kol HaMitzvah is not referring only that day. It means all the mitzvahs, like Kol HaMitzvah, like in the previous parsha, like in Eschanan. Hayom Kol HaMitzvah. So, the problem is, but they can't do all the mitzvahs. How could we say that in the merit of Kol HaMitzvahs, when there's only a very few number of mitzvahs that they can literally do? The Rebbe is Rashi Mefarish, Kol HaMitzvah Kipshuta. That's what I says Kipshuta. And Rashi cautions here, as medarf mefarish zayin kol ha-mitzvah, ala mitzvahs. It means all the mitzvahs. V'megefint as aloshin yochid ver banutz al shem. I mean, we find that it's called of the kind. So we see, even though it's many, but the kind includes many. So it's a mitzvah loshin yochid. It says kol haribu pratim. Hagam says nit gor glatik as it's island. Even though it's not so difficult, it's not so smooth to say so. So we're saying kol ha-mitzvah, all the mitzvah, the many mitzvahs. So we're not referring to 630 mitzvahs. We're talking about all the mitzvahs that are possible. Well, if he says that pirush kol ha-mitzvah, so what is the meaning of kol ha-mitzvah? Not alle Tariag mitzvahs. We're not talking about all 630 mitzvahs. Nor alle mitzvahs was the Eden Hamamegelchkeit say to Mekayim and Bizdak Misloritz. But we're talking about all those mitzvahs that the Jews have the possibilities to fulfill them until they go into Eretz Yisrael. So kol ha-mitzvah means, as the word mitzvah could mean, on the kind, on the mitzvah. Mitzvah is the type commandments. And which commandments we're talking about? Those that they can observe until they get into Eretz Yisrael. So, but it's still difficult to explain. So, Kenal, as we say, the Loshen Kol HaMitzvah, the language of Kol HaMitzvah would mean, the generality would mean all 630 mitzvahs. Is Shem Amin. We say all the mitzvah, which is the entire count, the entire kind. Was his koilel alla mitzvahs ununtershed, with all mitzvahs without distinction, not only those that they could do. On the other hand, it only means a minority of a minority, just a few, because it was impossible for them to do before going into Eretz Yisrael most mitzvahs. The Rebbe brings Rashi at Zweiten Pirush, and that's why Rashi brings the second commentary in Schalta b'mitzvah Gemara. If you started the mitzvah concluded. According to this, is kol ha-mitzvah nit kein shem. Then we don't say kol ha-mitzvah, the category of mitzvah nit kein shem amin, the type mitzvah from close ha-mitzvah nor dos meint the ganzkeit from a mitzvah canal. This means the whole sum of a mitzvah, the whole mitzvah. But Rashi doesn't just say it means the whole mitzvah. And the Rebbe asked before, why does it go by that? But what's the connection of doing the whole mitzvah with going into Eretz Yisrael? Es ist aber nicht verstandig. Was for Ashaychas or other tzivui of to come a mitzvah? What is the connection on this command to conclude a mitzvah to the Knesset La'aretz, to going into Eretz Yisrael? As b'schuz gvar mitzvahs, that in the merit when we conclude a mitzvah, we do a whole mitzvah. That come in the Knesset, they'll go they'll enter to Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe brings Rashi them hemshech. That's why Rashi brings the follow the continuation of this Rashi that he brings with all the details. The mitzvah is only called on the one who concludes it. It will come on as Zeileram, because that's the way Rashi explains how the Yidden Zuchus of the mitzvahs that they do is the conclusion of all the mitzvahs that they did before, as the Rebbe will explain. Hey, Kibush Virushas Eretz Yisrael durch the Yidden. We see that the conquering and the inheritance of Eretz Yisrael through the Jews still hinged on the activity of the Yidden. They were promised to go to Eretz Yisrael, yet we see they were delayed the 40 years. So, Choch as das is gekumen, although it came to live their Shvuah, the Eibishter says, I swore Asher Nishba Hashem Lavisechem. I swore to your father. Is the Sober Oich given verbunden mit Kima mitzvahs? But still, it was tied to the observance of mitzvahs. For the Yidden HaKeivshim, from the Yidden that were conquered. The Moshe Zok befeidish in them posuk, as Moshe says in them posuk, you keep the Kol HaMitzvahs, the Mantichin Uvosam. Was the far is that man? That's why we see, although there was a Shavuot, they were delayed. As Chosh is given the Shavuot to the others, although there was this Shavuot to the forefathers, Hot aber der Chet HaMeraglim Geuren given, the sin of the Meraglim caused, as Yender Deur is nicht rein, so they didn't go to Eretz Yisrael. Notwithstanding, they gave us the promise them to go to Eretz Yisrael. Means that it also had to do with their actions. Those come their Pasuk sagen, and this is what the Pasuk is coming to tell us. Although also the Jews of the previous generation, from the 40 years, they had fulfilled mitzvahs, and that way they helped to their Eretz Yisrael in the way of entering Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe references here the Ha'ara over here, as he said before in Ha'ara 35, from Eikev, in Letiska, meaning in all ways. But Afapikei Eino Nikras HaMitzvah Allah Hashem Gomer. But still, while they helped out, the mitzvah is called on the name of conclusion. The Eden was gefunden besoif shnas arboim. Those Jews who found themselves at the end of the 40th year, to Zei Davke Zok Moshe, it is specifically to them that Moshe says, Kol HaMitzvah Tishman Lasis Leman. You, all the mitzvah, to complete the mitzvah, so you will keep them, so you will enter, because of that you will enter. As Bia Sa'oretz, Yerusha Sa'oretz, that coming to the land and inheriting the land, but Oivgiton in Zchus V'Zeira mitzvahs is accomplished in the merit of their mitzvahs. Loidem is verstandig. According to this, we understand was in Kol HaMitzvah Leman. Now we understand why Kol HaMitzvah, for all the mitzvah, and because of that is Mudgesh der Inyan. That's why we emphasize here the idea for Nimizchalta the mitzvah Gomeris. If you started the mitzvah, finish it. The mitvert angesagt. Over here, we're instructed at the Knissa La'oretz Davke durch Kol HaMitzvah, that the entering in the land is because all the mitzvah, durch them was his goimra. It is through this that they concluded this for divas of goimer given them kiyum mitzvah. It is these that have concluded the observance of the mitzvah, the sim shnas arboim, as the 40th year concluded. So al pizeh, based on this interpretation, the pasuk is not really saying something different. There's move on as the medrash agod is nit moitzin b'pshuto, that the Agodic interpretation, the Medrash, is not taking out from the simple meaning legamri umevatel the pirush haposhut. It's not taking away in kol hamitzvah. That means all the mitzvahs. What is the whole mitzvah? But oich loitim pirush from Medrash Agoda, because also according to the interpretation of the Medrash Agoda, means nit lo is ein mitzvah. We're not just talking about one mitzvah. But yedun from alle mitzvahs, kol hamitzvahs, all the mitzvahs that were done. The alle mitzvahs. All the mitzvahs that the Yidden fulfilled during the 40 years, Bamidbar, then Farechen, they're all counted as mitzvahs from them there. They are mitzvahs of the generation that concluded them. The mitzvahs, Farde Knesset Loretz, the mitzvahs, they concluded the mitzvahs before Knesset Loretz. So all the mitzvahs that were done and Kol HaMitzvah that they're concluded now, is Laman Tichu brings you to Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe brings out, this is actually connected even when Moshe Rabbeinu was forced and not able to go into Eretz Yisrael. That's why he didn't finish the mitzvah. Also, his mitzvah is Nikras Al Shem Gemra. So also the Yidden that did not have a connection to the Chet HaMeraglim, so also their mitzvahs as well. That's why Rashi continues with the Rashi. But there is, however, a question. We understand those Yidden that had a connection to the advice of the Meraglim, and they didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. Is move on mitzvahs werden. So we understand how come their mitzvahs are b'shayches Knesset Loretz, as we count them as they relate to entering the land. Gerechend, they are counted nit al zeira, not as there, but kol mitzvah, but for the Yidden al shem, for the Yidden was an arayin in Eretz Yisrael, but on the name of the Yidden that entered Yisrael. The bald zeom nit gevot arayin in Eretz Yisrael, since they did not want to go into Eretz Yisrael. So adra begering, when on the contrary they caused as Eden Zaun bleiben in Midbar Mem Shana, they caused them to stay in the desert 40 years. Oh, Berdin was ein mitgiven Beitzachos mit dem Meraglim, but those Jews that was not in the same advice as the spies, und seine gestorben in Midbar, and the only reason that they died in the desert is mid Nordafar, was they seinen given in Klala Gezeda, just because they were included in the decree. Zayin dik mesim shonol mile. They were 20 years above. Everybody was 20 years and above. In jenem Zman, Pavozon Zeiden mitzvahs nicht verrechnet werden als solche, was haben zugeholfen zu der Knesset Loretz. Why shouldn't their mitzvahs be counted as such that help to enter the land? So why are we giving all the credit to the Bnei Yisrael that are entering? We tell them kol mitzvah that they get all the mitzvah. And also on the other hand, these are Yidden that didn't sin. On the other hand, the Yidden that basically given younger, they were younger than 20, but they didn't want to go in either. But they did enter. But if they did not, they didn't want to go into Israel. But the decree that was in the generation of Meraglim did not apply to them. They entered Israel. Why should the mitzvah be called on the name of those who are going to Eretz Yisrael? They're going to Eretz Yisrael. Why would they get credit for mitzvahs that they didn't want to do? So they're getting the credit from all those that before, but they themselves didn't want to go. Rashi, that's why Rashi brings Shenemar Besatz Mesyoyt and Goimer. Since Moshe himself did it, but Moshe did not get a chance to finish the Gamru Yisrael. What do we understand from this? Alpizeh is first time. Aleph. Since kein Chilik nit was is given the Siba, so the Velcher nit gamer given the mitzvah. It doesn't make a difference. What was the reason that you didn't finish the mitzvah? Even if it's through a mishap, it wasn't up to him. He didn't have a chance. He didn't make it in Eretz Yisrael. He couldn't bring Yosef's bones to bury because he never went to Eretz Yisrael. There, the mitzvah for it's still called and the one who completed it. So therefore, the Yidden, even if they didn't sin, and they still didn't go into Eretz Yisrael, the one who goes to Eretz Yisrael is called on their name. Based on there's a leidoch, and also on the other hand, even though he himself did it, das heißt, as for the Yinger, as for the Yetzi Mitzrayim, Yinger von Esrim Shana, those who went out of Mitzrayim, who are younger than 20 years, das haben später hereingebracht, die Atzmes Yosef in Eretz Yisrael. They brought in. Nobody else wanted to help Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe did it by himself. How could the other people get credit for it? So those who are younger than Shormas haben später reingebracht die Atzmis Yosef in Eretz Yisrael, und sie Eikev gewesen, even though they didn't do anything before, and still B'Shchem, and they buried B'Shchem, haben Be'ez Yitzvis Mitzrayim nicht gewollt helfen Moshe, and they didn't want to help Moshe. In there is Askas Arusilem and Atzmis Yosef Mitzrayim, in his preoccupation to try occupy take out from Yosef bones of Yosef Mitzrayim. Alpha became the Balzium dos Goimer Gven is Nikras Hashmom. Since they concluded it, it's called on their name. Al derech zeh bin the same thing is in our case. In the Knesset Loretz, they're going to Israel. Aleph, since Nikras Al Shem HaGoimro, we call it on the ones who finished the Boy Oretz. Oich Klape Di also towards Di was ein Nita Raim Etzadanoinus. Also those who didn't go in because of not being able to, because they were forced. Hashem didn't let them in, not because of a sin. Nitzul Ibzer Shul, it wasn't their guilt. And still, the ones that do go in still get their credit. And basis, Niklas Hashem HaGoimer, it's called in those who finish. Afila Hashem Al-Zah, even on the name of such was at freer, nit blois, nit ongeben ton the mitzvahs, not only did he start doing the mitzvahs, nor giton the meipech, did the opposite. And still, if he finished it, it called him his name. Alpizeh is moving bepashtus. Now we understand simply what Rashi brings dafke. Rashi specifically brings. Unor dem inyan, he only brings this idea she'ein and ikras hamitzvah al shem agoimra. He says it doesn't call only the one who concludes it. Bring the raya from Moshe, and he brings the proof from Moshe, because he's trying to bring out with regards to what happened with the people that were in the Midbar, both those who wasn't their fault, they didn't make it out, and those who were guilty, and still they finished it. Bring the raya the information. And didn't bring from Yehuda that he was descended Varaya from Yehuda and the proof Yehuda. But because we're not discussing here how serious is this matter for need mitzvah, that it's a very serious matter not to complete the mitzvah you start. Over here, what's important is the idea as Nikras Kol Hashem HaGoimra, that it's called on the one who completes it, the Dosh Nichas Loretz. Unafila in Azafal, say who is the one that gets the credit? That's what we want to know. Not to tell us about is a very serious matter of not finishing a mitzvah. Unafila in Azafal, when the Friedrich Maschel, what is Nidzoiche given? So Goymer Zamachmas Eines, even in a case where the previous who started it did not merit to finish because of a mishap, still the credit goes to the one that finishes. Zion. And the Rebbe answers with this another question. Now, another question in Rashi. This idea that you start a mitzvah, is it something optional that it's best to finish it, or it's terrible if you don't finish it? And in Rashi, it starts. Let's look inside. I have another answer, another question on Rashi. Seems like the opening is not the same as with what Rashi finishes, and the end is not with what Rashi opens up. Rashi in the Pirush Medrash Agode Rashi starts in the commentary of the Medrash Haggadah. Im ischalto b'mitzvah gebayreisa. If you start the mitzvah concluded, was from Loshen is mashma, language, you have to conclude it. It's an obligation. Was from Loshen is mashma, is doing the machiv. Or mitzvah, there's an obligation. It's a mitzvah to finish it. Not optional. It's not if you want your name on it, you kill it, just do it because you have to do it. The noch is a mamshich. And then Rashi finishes, continues. It's only called to want to finish it. What about if I don't want the name on it? I don't have to. The says that's his boys and he says something that pays for you. The mitzvah, so long in order for the mitzvah to be called on your name, so then finish it. It was the mitzvah. The person doesn't care, so it's not going. I'm not going to get the credit for it. Is mashma said talking muz that there's no have to as dafke erzol goymer that he has to finish it. How do we settle this? Is it an obligation or is it just if you want your name on it? Now, but based on the above, as the hemshech in Rashi, that the flow in Rashi she'enikras chulu masbir zayin. That what is this coming to explain? Nor the shayches limit the dan. It's only coming to explain our case. We're not talking about how important it is to a mitzvah to finish it. It's only what's important to us to explain how these people that are going into Yisrael are getting the credit for all the mitzvahs. Is those moving? So the one who starts has to, there's an obligation to go resign the mitzvah. He has to finish it. But the Pirush Rashi is oisen to madgiv zayin, but our Rashi is not trying to tell us here what the chiyuv is so much. Tells you, yeah, you have to start it. But Rashi wants to emphasize the mechidus with them goymer mitzvah. Rashi wants to talk about what's the novelty of one who concludes the mitzvah. As chod der maschil is given an oinus, even though that the beginner was an oinus. So he couldn't help it. He can't go in He couldn't finish it. If he didn't do that, as in our case, Divo Zayin and Nita Rein Eretz Yisrael, those who didn't enter in Yisrael, similar to Moshe Rabbeinu himself, Alpha became that's why it's called only Shem HaGoimra. So it's not just trying to bring out the obligation. Of course, there's an obligation, but here we're not talking about the obligation. But we're saying that the emphasis here is to show that those who went into Israel got credit for everybody, even those who couldn't make an extra, not because of their fault, and that is Laman Tichiyum, because they concluded on all the mitzvahs that everybody did throughout the desert is the goyimra through them, and that brings to them the Laman Tichiyum Vos of Yishus. And now the Rebbe goes in Yitzches to a whole new explanation in Yon Mefloim in Halacha, as we will see in the Hamshach and Yonim.